The one thing we're never taught at school is the difference between positive and negative space. I suppose we might say that there's no point to learning such a thing, that it all sounds very abstract. And what possible relevance does it have to our daily lives to be able to know exactly what the difference is between positive and negative space? And in one way, on the very small scale of things, in terms of just going ahead and doing the things in life that we do, it doesn't make any difference. But if we want to look at the whole of life, or you want to get the bigger picture of what stuff is about, what's it all about, then we need to know. Because if we don't, we will end up not knowing anything. We'll end up being totally deluded. It's kind of like a default situation, really. So positive space is mapped out space. It's space which is on a graph, so to speak. So wherever we are in positive space, we can relate it to all the other places. So another way of putting it is we could say that positive space is definable space or knowable space. It's a territory which we can know about and which we can locate things in. And in addition, it's a territory within which we can predict future movements based on what's gone on before and what the present situation is. So it's a known space and it's a predictable space. It's a space that we can have certainty about. It's a space that we can have positive knowledge about. More technically, slightly technically, we can say that positive space is the mapping out of some kind of fixed or defined viewpoint, so that it's the viewpoint that creates the positiveness of the space. It's not inherent in the space, because when we're talking about positive space, we're really talking about projection, the world as it appears from one particular viewpoint. It would be jeopardized. The whole concept, the whole thing of positive space would be jeopardized, compromised, if we started looking in different ways. For the simple reason that having a different viewpoint creates a different view. So then we got two views, or three views, or four views, and they're all different. It's a bit like Robert Anton Wilson's joke about how a man with one what time it is, and a man with two never does, because unless you actually got some kind of super accurate atomic clock, most watches that they're going to disagree a little bit. So if we've got two means of knowing what the time is and they both slightly disagree, we're left with uncertainty. It's the same thing with perspective. There is any number of viewpoints we can take to look at something, and each viewpoint, if it's properly different from the others, will show us a different picture. Now, if you sum up, so to speak, all of the possible viewpoints, of which there are infinitely many, and see what that picture produces, it doesn't actually produce any picture at all. Everything then, there becomes so much information in the picture that we can't actually pick out a defined object, a defined figure. So to have a clearly defined object or figure, which is to say an object that we can make definite statements about and say things about it that are definitely true, we can only have the one viewpoint. And so being strictly limited to one viewpoint produces positive space. That's how he makes positive space. And just to repeat the point, positive space doesn't exist. The thing in itself is purely a function of us restricting our vision to only the one viewpoint. So another way of putting that is to say a positive space is created by entropy, because entropy is all the other viewpoints that are there, but which we can't know about for the purpose of the exercise. They've been screened out, they've been blanked out. And it is as if there are no other viewpoints. It's an exercise in, well, suppose there only was one viewpoint, one way of looking at things. What would the world look like? So we run that experiment. We set the conditions up and we run it and see what it's like. So it's like that, only it's an experiment that we don't engage in consciously, because as soon as we do this, as soon as we restrict ourselves to only the one way of looking at things, there's a kind of little flip over, kind of a thing that happens, that we become unaware of the possibility of any other viewpoints. And the reason for that is that if I have awareness that there are other viewpoints, then that in itself would compromise positive space. And the way things work is that any one viewpoint creates a closed shop. In other words, any one viewpoint, once I screen out all the others, or once the entropy in the system makes the information that would be obtained from the other viewpoints inaccessible to me, because that's the kind of most succinct definition of entropy. It's information that's unavailable to us, which means that we don't know it's unavailable, because if we knew it was unavailable, we'd still know about it, and therefore the information wouldn't be lost. With entropy, is all about losing that information. So we lose the information. We don't know that there's information there. It's totally inaccessible to us. So as far as we're concerned, it isn't there. There isn't any more information. So this is a kind of a trick. But it's also a trick that we get lost in, because once we well and truly do put all our money on the one viewpoint, we forget about everything else. We forget about the broadness of vision that is possible. And we have no way of inferring it. We have no way of deducing it, or getting any sort of intimation that there is a plurality of perspectives. This is what complexity theory is all about, having a plurality of perspectives. And the thing that is acknowledged here is that none of these perspectives are any better than any others. It's not like we've got a real proper perspective and there's all the other ones which kind of could be true, but we could play around with. That isn't the case. All perspectives are exactly identical in terms of weighting, in terms of their validity, which means that there is no one positive reality. There would only be one positive reality if there was only one viewpoint, and there isn't. So when we do think that there is a positive reality, positive space, which we do all the time, that's because we've forgotten. So the definite black and white world that the thinking mind shows us is only possible because of forgetting. It's only possible because of this cosmic amnesia kind of a thing, which is an interesting way of looking at it, because it brings to mind the sleep metaphors in fairy tales. All those fairy tales where someone falls asleep for a long time. like Snow White or um, a few other variations on this theme. And also, it brings to mind the the story of the Odyssey, where Odysseus comes to this island, and all the crew members start snacking on the fruit of forgetting, the lotus thingy, whatever it is, which as soon as you take it, you completely forget, and you forget that you've forgotten, and that's completely gone. So we could say, oh yeah, they're talking about something like poppy or something, some kind of thing like an opium poppy, but it's a more metaphysical thing than that. It's unconsciousness. It's the state of unconsciousness, and we're all lotus eaters. We're all snacking on the lotuses. And as many traditions say, this induces a state of sleep. So the state in which we think there is a positive space, a positive reality, and that's the end of the story. It's the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. So, and everything is certain because everything that happens in positive space is certain. So this notion, which sounds at first fairly abstract or philosophical, we can tie it back to the whole groundwork of myths and fairy tales and stories that humanity has produced over the centuries, over the millennia. So it ties into the big picture, the big story of what stuff's about. And in this present day, we're more stuck to the one viewpoint than ever. We've gone we've gone the whole hog. So we live in a non-mythological culture, a non-ironic culture, which maybe that's the same thing as saying as a woke culture. Maybe a woke culture is a non-ironic culture. Culture without any sense of humour in it, really, because humour's a funny thing, in the sense that it, there's more to it than meets the eye. It's a there's a whole kind of thing to humour. It's a psychological it's a subject for psychological study. I know Freud wrote a whole big book on humour, in which he explored some ways of looking at humour, and kind of a funny book, really. There's some funny jokes in it for sure, but the idea in humour is that we're looking at things in only the one way. Blah 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 da 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 da, and then out of nowhere we suddenly get a new perspective. We suddenly get a new way of looking at things, which throws a new light on the old way. It kind of devalidates it really, because the old way isn't at all what you thought it was once we have a different perspective on it. So humor provides that different perspective. It's like, so we revisit the whole story in a different way, and that's makes us laugh. Kind of, it can be funny. It's like discovering you've been taken for a ride in some way. So we can say that humor is all about having extra perspective, which corresponds to saying having a kind of increase in consciousness or an increase in waking up. So when we wake up, it's funny. Waking up is a funny thing. When you wake up, you laugh. So it is said in the East. In the West, we look upon spirituality or religion as a deeply serious thing. As one philosopher has said, Alfred North Whitehead, I think, the Bible is unique in world literature, and that is what he says. I'd agree with him, but it is what Human says, in that it's unique in world literature in that it is devoid of any sense of humour, completely devoid, and the whole paternalistic, patriarchal kind of judgmental kind of punishment, and you have to, obey God's rules or God's commandments and all of that. That's profoundly non-humorous. It's what you'd call a non-humorous situation. And you can see the kind of the clergy and then the upper officials in churches. Awful serious look to them. So what that shows us, simply enough, is they're asleep. They're not conscious. They haven't got the joke. And as a result of not getting the joke, they don't want anyone else to get it either. Jokes become disrespectful, kind of like the Puritans and the way they would go on plays and singing and stuff like that. It's disrespectful. It embodies a fundamental disrespect for the important, whatever it is, the important message that the old Puritans or Calvinists that were going on about. Very serious folk. It wasn't a good time. If you're a stand-up comedian, that wasn't a good time. You'd be arrested straight away. Life is all very serious. And that points to the fact that this is a completely unconscious state of mind, completely unconscious. There isn't any other viewpoint, only the one viewpoint. And when we have only the one viewpoint, we take the lecture that we see very, very seriously, as if it is the only possible reality, and we're really serious about it. Missing the irony or missing the joke that reality is only there because we're restricting our vision. We're narrowing ourselves down so much that we can go around pontificating and making definite statements about the world, which gives us immense ontological security. So these lads that do like to stick to the one viewpoint and the very serious, there's a kind of, we can also see that and see beneath it and see that there's a very great fear there, fear of the world being opened up in front of our eyes, to show that there's more, there's a lot more to it than we thought there was, and which would devalidate our position and make us start having to take stuff on board and learn new stuff. God forbid.